on the floor, showing the students my dog. It's a whole new world, right? But to answer your question, I listed a few things, and then if I have time, I'll demo something. If not, I'll do it on the next question. Some surprise silver linings for me. So one of them for me, and this might just be discipline specific, but Canvas became an incredibly exciting, new, flexible way for me to engage with the students. I hadn't used Blackboard in my previous lecture positions, or all those various interfaces, and I have always found Sakai to be not that exciting. So Canvas sort of opened a new door for me to do the deep planning I do in my syllabus, but the module program, I feel like now I have something online, and the students do as well, that I can change regularly. And if someone has a link, I throw it into that day's augmented activities, and I know people have been doing this since forever, but for me, this was very new, and this was a surprise silver lining. And now I feel like I don't have to reinvent the wheel every time I do course planning, because my course planning is so transparent now in Canvas, where it used to be in my private notebook. I also think that's hopefully much more helpful for the students. The availability of guest artists and reduced fees to be able to be in exchange with people that I didn't think to have virtually in the past. I'm sure other people have always made that an option, but I think this has sort of given us permission to do that and recognize that that's a tool, and that's something that we can maneuver with, and I will invest in completely in the future. And that's a gift, and it's people in the field, but it's also those people that you couldn't get to speak because it would cost too much, or they live in a different country, and now you're like, hey, finally, can you come chat with my class? Huge. The limitations of 3D space forced me to have to teach differently, but I don't want to take up too much time, so I might show something in the next question that I can answer and talk a little bit more about that. It also asked me, or forced me to ask students to take on different, not maybe more, but different responsibilities than they used to, and I think that's a bonus. I think that's a plus. There are certain things that I couldn't do, especially within a demonstrative practice, that they were asked to do on their own, and then these things happen, right? And then I realized, like, oh, I know why they're turning off their Zoom, and that's actually my next thing, is a surprise silver lining. I have more empathy for students than I ever have before. To be frank, I think I have a better understanding of the various life situations that affect each of us individually, beyond the kind of isms, which are already important and that we're aware of, to recognize the complete subjectivity of each student and how that changes on a day-to-day basis. The last two things I would say is our students were invited, and we invited guests to teach them how to edit and use new software. And that's a huge silver lining. It's something you would appreciate in a dance curriculum, but this was a silver lining, right? Because our students were forced to make creative projects and make dance films. So although I knew Adobe Premiere, I was able to work with students, develop a new language, develop new editing skills, and our students just like rocked it. And then the last thing is something I'm really interested in is subverting norms and expectations. And so something artistically that became interesting to me, but then became some fodder for our class, was like, why do you have to sit and stare at the Zoom? At least in my class, you have permission to keep your body active, look somewhere else in space, to change my expectation of also what student engagement was, because half my students had their cameras off half the time with full permission. So it also changed my expectation of what engagement coming back at me meant. So I'm like, what is a comfortable place for you to listen? Do you need to be moving while we're doing a discussion in a lecture? And so it sort of prompted me to think more broadly about how I can incite exploration for students, even in the classroom when we're back, to think outside of like, this is a sitting time, or this is a robust experimental time. Like, what does it mean to be an individual daily? And what does it mean to create a relationship where people understand your individual cues, not set up by certain social structures like Zoom, that this means I'm listening. Anyways, those are my 6 things. Thanks, y'all.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kevin. Kathy, will you answer next?
Kevin had so many wonderful things. This is great. So for surprise silver linings, I think there were more than I perhaps had realized. I was fortunate to teach an elective each semester, and to see students kind of coming into those classes still eager to learn, and realizing that we could still build a community, even though we weren't on campus. I think that was kind of a wonderful thing to realize. There were other ways that we could still engage and still come together. And in some ways, I think there might have even been more interest in if we had been in a normal and on-campus semester, because people were happy to be together and talking about the material. I have never seen my institution be as flexible and as concerned about the whole person as we have been this year, and that has been wonderful. It can be hard to make changes to curricula. We are very thoughtful and deliberative, right, about any kind of change, which is good, but it also means things can change more slowly. And I think this year taught us that we have the capacity to be creative, to learn whole new ways of teaching that are really mindful of our students as whole people. And I hope we can kind of carry that spirit forward. If we can do it this year, we can certainly do it when we are back together in person. One thing that is good and bad is that emotions can be very contagious on campus. Sometimes that can be wonderful when you have a bunch of students engaged in a topic, and it can be energizing, and we can kind of help support each other. And sometimes that emotional contagion can enhance stress, for example. And so one thing I've heard from colleagues is that for better or for worse, while we did not have that contagious joy of learning, we also did not have the contagious stress, or maybe some of the same social pressures in the way that we sometimes do when we're together. I think personally, sometimes there was a freedom from parts of the job that can be onerous, like a commute, for example. There is freedom from that, and there is more time than for other parts of work. And teaching is very performative, right? We are often in the classroom with the students, and teaching by Zoom in some ways took part of that pressure off. Of course, we still want to exude energy and enthusiasm, but it's maybe a different kind of interaction on the faculty end. And I love the point Kevin made too about giving students the freedom to have their cameras on or off. When everyone's cameras are off, at least I can imagine that they are all laughing at my jokes, which I very much appreciate, that imagined response that they are having. And so I think I will stop there.
Awesome. This has already been such a rich conversation. Thank you both. Cory, do you want to take another answer to this question?
Sure. So one silver lining for me was that moving to Zoom for synchronous discussion forced us to have conversations we wouldn't otherwise have had about how to use the Zoom tools. So like, what kinds of contributions go in the chat? What kinds of contributions are the raise hand function? Like, is it okay if we, physically raise hands for certain kinds of things? And because the classes I teach are so heavily discussion-based, we were already to some extent talking about how do you have a productive conversation, what kinds of contributions are helpful. But adding the layer of technological change made us, I think, more reflective about that and put more energy into setting ground rules up front. So I found that helpful, and I'll want to carry some of that forward. The other thing I was going to mention was special guests, and Kevin already brought this up, so maybe I'll just try to quickly say why I think those were so good. I think there are a few different kinds of benefits. So one is that, I have friends and colleagues with different expertise than me, and so that meant students had access to, people who could more readily recommend further reading or could answer different kinds of questions on the fly. That is sort of a clear upshot. Another one, I think, is that there's representational benefit to seeing that not all philosophers look like me, not all of them sound like me. Having just a range of different people came in, I think, made it clearer that different kinds of people can do this. And a third, maybe related benefit, I think, is that to the extent that students got the picture that academic philosophy is done by real people, I think it became easier for them to feel empowered to make arguments of their own in their papers, right? Sometimes students will get stuck in this mode of only summarizing and being afraid to make an argumentative move of their own. But seeing that, like, you know, the person whose paper you read is also the person who you were joking around with before class, it makes it a little easier to think like, well, this is just a conversation and I have something to contribute to it. So, that's just some further reason for liking the guest Q&A thing. And I think Kevin's right that in the past I might have thought, oh, I have to bring this person to campus in order to do that, but that's not true, right? We can Zoom them in the future as well. So I'm hoping to do much more of that.
Wonderful. I guess we'll move on to the next question. This has been so lovely already. Our next question is, since we were all sort of thrown into this, was there anything you were nervous about trying that you went for anyways? How did it go? Michelle, will you kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, this has been so great. I want to ask follow-up questions to everybody. So I'll try to be brief and maybe just give like a kind of snapshot so we have time to do that. One thing I was really nervous to try before I even knew that we would be online, and then even more so once I knew we were going to definitely be on Zoom, is that I was teaching a new class that was a community engagement course. And I had identified a partner in Pomona of the Dow Center for the Arts, and the artistic and executive director was really excited, but I have zero experience like doing the logistical stuff, busing students, like how long do we spend there? How's it gonna work? And honestly, like the administrative stuff was my worst nightmare. Like I could maybe deal with, I was like, okay, I think I can maybe do the kind of collaborative stuff, but the getting people there and corralling bodies was one of the parts that I had the most dread about. And so I was really nervous to both continue on Zoom because I thought, are we going to be able to, what we ended up doing is running a series of creative writing workshops that were led by Claremont students with high school students from the city of Pomona. And I was like, okay, can I trust my students to do this? And how can I be sure that it's going well? All of those questions, but it ended up, because the logistical piece dropped out, at least the like busing people to and from, and people having to have different kind of schedules, it ended up being such an incredible success, even to the extent that this semester, when I wasn't teaching the course, we continued the workshops, and then I pulled in students from my small rural hometown of Everett, Pennsylvania, who had a kind of cross-country, cross-cultural, truly from rural, urban, all of the things, conversation with students from different high school. And I had student volunteers, incredible student volunteers from my class last semester who continued to do the workshop, and I'm going to hopefully do that again. So that was, I guess that's a silver lining that I was also nervous about. So I guess it's 2-for-1 answer. And the other thing I'll just say really quickly, I was really nervous about asynchronous classes. I ended up having an optional synchronous class once per week. And so I would say, you know, I'm gonna be on Zoom both classes. Please come on Tuesdays. Thursdays is optional synchronous. Otherwise, meet in small groups and do this activity. And students really rose to the challenge of not only, sometimes they would come, but other times they talked about how they loved having that small group to kind of keep them rooted with the class throughout the semester. And if they couldn't, they often remarked, you know, I couldn't really bear to come to class, which I don't try to take too much offense to, come to class for the full session, but like, it was so important to have my like group of 3 other students, and we would talk about the readings, or we would just like check in on one another. And that was just as important to me as if they were like, you know, completing every reading. And sort of like what I think, Kathy, you were saying, it enabled me to kind of care about the entire student and value them kind of being okay more than my my prior focus on just like, okay, are they learning the concepts? So I hope to take that forward as well.
Wonderful. I'm going to invite Dave. Will you share another answer to that question?
Sure, I'm happy to. Thanks. Actually, this follows on pretty nicely with what Michelle just shared. I was nervous last spring, you know, when we had to transition suddenly at spring break time, of going to asynchronous because I've taught synchronous. That's like been the way it's been done, right, in person. And so like going asynchronous, partly because I was worried, I don't know where students are going to be, like really nervous about their situations, wanted to be, maximally, flexible. And so I was really nervous about that transition. I think it went okay. For some students, it was not good. They just lost community and they were just gone. And then I was nervous, like, okay, given that how that ended, what about this fall 2020? I think I'm going to go synchronous as the default now, as opposed to the other way around. You can still, everything's technically optional, but that's the expectation, the norm. And that went surprisingly well. So I was nervous about would students be able to do it? And especially students loved when I could have them in groups, a little like Michelle just shared, with like stable groups of like having a group together in like my lab course. I knew the students, I knew where they were living, I knew who was friends with who, and so I could put them in groups of buddies essentially, and that was great. That was fantastic. All fall was just super with those students who were mostly juniors and seniors. So that was great. But then in the fall and then this spring, okay, I've done the stable groups that work really well when I know the students. When I don't know the students yet, right, or there's like tons of them, and I'm not going to like manually stick them in little groups, whatever. Okay, am I okay with random groups? And that was actually really good too, because they got to know each other. They didn't know each other either, and they got to know each other really well, like at least, a sampling of the class. Over time, they got to know almost everybody. And that went really well. The students were really up for that. And so that was both for like first year students and for later students. I was surprised at how well that went. And then another thing I was very nervous about, particularly this semester, which I didn't do when I had tons of first year students in general chem, but I have in organic chem class, having students share things live in Zoom. So having pre-class work that normally I'd have them go to the board and write things and share to class, which works really well normally in person. I was nervous about trying that on Zoom, but I'm like, this is pretty, like students consistently say this is one of the better parts of class. Like they really like it after each semester. Like I really would like to keep this somehow and have this piece of the active learning and speaking chemistry, not just hearing it and writing it, right? That's one of my major learning objectives. And so I did it and it worked really well. It wasn't perfect because not every student would always show up. But students would jump in like, oh, I'll do it, I'll jump in or whatever, or, oh, my video's not working. Oh, it's okay, someone else will show the video, but you can give the audio, right? And explain this. So that worked really well. It was like great teamwork, just came out of nowhere. And so I was really impressed at how that went, even though I thought it was maybe going to be awful, but it didn't really take up too much class time either. Like I was afraid it would take forever to connect. That went pretty well. So those were things that I wasn't sure if it would go well, but mostly went pretty well.
Yeah, you went for it. Good job. Deborah, do you have another answer to this question?
Yeah, so, when I was working with CTL and we were doing a bunch of workshops over the past year about changing your class from, in person to online, some of the recommendations that we made was, just change a couple things, this would be great. Well, I decided to ignore all of that and I completely redid my classes from really top to bottom, which was not wise. So, with respect to nervous, I was nervous because I completely redid my classes. So I, rewrote the syllabus. I'm not a Canvas fan. We are required to use it at some point, but I prefer student interaction off of Discord, which is kind of like Slack. So I had all the discussions on Discord. I used Perusall, which is an annotation service. I decided to kind of structure my class around building more classroom community. So that's why it was Perusall. We also did Zoom bubble groups where I broke the class into small groups and they recorded a conversation about the readings on Zoom. And then I shared that video with the other class. I also adjusted the final project. Instead, I usually require papers. And I said, you can do papers, you could do a podcast, you could do a website. I mean, I lost my mind literally, but, but I decided to, really have a lot of flexibility and respond to what students might want to do. And so I was nervous about that. Oh, one final thing, I decided to do ungrading. So on top of, it's completely ridiculous, right? Really, it was like the X Games, right? I'm teaching. But it really, I think the students responded really well to quite a few of the things that I did. So I'm glad that I did it. But, I think probably the part of it that I was most nervous about was the ungrading part, because I hadn't done that before, right? And so really trying to figure out what system would work for me and how that might look for the students, I think was a difficult thing for me to conceptualize and communicate effectively for the students. And it ended up working well enough, which I guess we can talk about later, but I would say that was probably the part of, how I I constructed my courses, particularly for this semester, that I was really most nervous about. That's it.
Yeah, like Michelle said, and like Kevin says in the chat, I have so many follow-up questions, but we'll try to move quickly and see what we can get to at the end. So I'm going to move us along to our next question. Did this year change how you think about yourself and your role in student learning? Did you learn anything about yourself as an instructor or community member? Kathy, will you get us started with this question?
Yes. So I think I'm coming away with a much clearer sense of what's really valuable about being at a residential small liberal arts college. Just the community that it can bring, the support we can offer students, academic and emotional, and the campus resources too. Just Wi-Fi, stable Wi-Fi, for example, is a huge one, right? And when I think of how I can support student learning, I'm thinking a lot about giving them structure and flexibility within that structure, giving very clear expectations, being as transparent as I can with what it is we want to learn, why we want to learn it, and how they're going to show me that they've learned. Giving them the resources to try to do that learning, and giving the resources in as many formats as I can. And giving them some enthusiasm, trying to show them what is beautiful and powerful and exciting about whatever course content that we're learning. And so it's been nice this year to try to identify those priorities.
Wonderful. Barbara, do you want to take a stab at this question?
Sure. So I think I might be repeating things that had already been said. Someone had mentioned letting students be whole persons. I think maybe Kevin used that phrase, whole people who have very complicated lives. So one of the things that I realized is that I'm a whole person. I have a very complicated life. I have lots of pets. Sometimes my cats throw up while I'm throw up hairballs while I'm lecturing. Sometimes I don't feel like it. Sometimes I'm sad. Sometimes I'm like a mess. Sometimes I didn't do the reading. So I think one of the things that I did that I learned was okay. And also, I can't really see anyone, even though I have glasses on, because my eyesight has deteriorated so much that, like, for me to see you, I actually have to hold my glasses like this. So this kind of freed me up. Like, I don't really have to be afraid of anything, because I can't really see anyone and everyone is somewhere else, and they're not going to I'm not going to be physically hurt if I try something crazy. So I just sort of let go. And I think, I let myself be as vulnerable as I would like my students to be. I let myself try different things. Like, I also experimented with, like Deborah said, with ungrading. I let the students help me write the syllabus. We wrote the syllabus this semester as we went through the class, and I was really nervous about that, because I thought, what if we don't get everything done? And then the other thing I did was like, well, I don't really want to do all those things either. I'm really tired. So what's the most important thing that we can do? And I think, by letting the students know that I'm also struggling, that kind of helped them feel like they could still come to class even if they didn't do their reading, even if they look a mess, and they just woke up and don't look that great. They could turn their cameras off and they could still be there. And I also was a mess, sometimes I was like, I haven't washed my hair in a week, it's a good thing we're not in the same room. So I think that kind of helped me feel that I could be a contributor to the community by just being like a whole person. So I'll just stop there. Thank you.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Kevin, do you have anything to add to this question? Kevin?
Oh, yes. Hi, sorry, I was muted. I'm just digesting what everyone's saying. It's so beautiful. I guess just kind of piggybacking off what was just said, I think it's something I knew, but I think it's something I've accepted now, or had the time to accept, is that students need me differently. It's like something I'm always aware of, but I think the intense circumstances of the racialized violence that everyone was processing it separate, along with the pandemic, I think like opened up some doors and conduits for me to think differently about what it means to be available and to take, to just continue to try to be receptive to the cues with which students are giving me about what they need, right? And that's of course different from each, each person has their own pedagogical values, but that's important to me. And I think that it's something I've always been interested in, but it's something I've accepted more now. Like, my relationship to this student, yes, there's course material, but like, and this isn't for every student, but this student has shown me a cue or revealed something about themselves that is a door opening, a conduit for us to have a deeper conversation about that. And that it doesn't necessarily have to always be about that learning objective, right? Because that's great, and we've done that, and it's going to happen, right? But that the place for learning, and we're aware of this, we know this, but it's this time has made that real, and has been like, oh, this student's father passed, and that's something, the student doesn't come to school for a week, and then they come back, you have a quick chat. This was different because there was so much space. And it was harder for me to take cues. So what it actually meant is I needed to reach out more. And it's something that I think I will continue to try to do, because I think sometimes we take for granted that people are okay in person. And this is just for me. I feel a bit more sensitive, and I hope to be more sensitive to that in the future. Yeah, I could say a few more things, but I'll leave it there.
Wonderful. Lots about that. Both us and the students are people, and even when we're in person, we're going to continue to be people with needs for ourselves and for others. I'll move us along to our next question as we continue to think about those things. Were you more structured or less structured in how you set up your classes and assignments in this remote environment? Will the changes you made improve the way you format classes for in-person instruction, or was it a one-time thing? Erin, do you want to get us started with this question?
Yes, thank you. So actually it was, I would open up my lecture notes for a class I've taught like many, many times, and I think, oh my goodness, what have I been doing all these years? Because I would just kind of walk into class and we would chat, and we would kind of figure things out, and it was very much like kind of really responding to people's cues and questions, and I just felt like that wasn't going to work on Zoom. So I became a lot more structured about my classes. And one thing that really helped me was the Zoom format, dropping an agenda in at the beginning of class, and just dropping that into the chat, and just even formulating the agenda really helped me structure my class a lot more clearly. And then I started using PowerPoint, and I hate PowerPoint so much, and I hate making PowerPoints, and I just can't stand it. But I just felt like people needed those visual cues, and they just needed them a lot more because they weren't getting other kind of embodied cues. And I wasn't able to judge as easily like what people are taking in or not. So I started doing PowerPoints, and that also helped me to become a much better lecturer, I think, because I had to be a little more like a little less loosey-goosey. So I'm actually kind of embarrassed and think, what was I doing all these years? And then with the assignments, I felt like they needed more information about the assignments this year. And so I would provide like things that I hadn't really done before, like sample papers, which I also don't really like because then they all write the same thing, but I still would do it. Or I would, Carl Whitman, who's the director of writing at Pomona College, suggested like that cover memos and metacognition in writing is really helpful for students to feel a sense of place. And I felt like that was really important this year to feel a little bit more grounded and a little bit more sense of place and a little more sense of belonging. And so I really instituted that, and I will definitely continue doing those cover memos. And then also with assignments, like just giving a few more steps. And so like I see Megan Donnelly's on the call from the library, and if you all haven't worked with her at the library, you all should. She's fabulous. But in my first year seminar, she had us do a Sakai forum where students would post their topics, and then she would comment on the topic, and then other students would comment on the topic, and that seemed to work really well. And it was just a little more structure to the beginning of a staged or scaffolded assignment. I always do those scaffolded assignments, but Megan kind of helped me to see that maybe I needed to do things a little more earlier and give students a little more time, but having it online helped to structure that a little bit too. So I'll just stop there.
Thank you. Cory, do you have an answer for this question?
Sure. I think there were two ways in which I was more structured this year. One was about structuring opportunities for social interaction. So like in my environmental ethics class, I set up a Facebook group for students. In some other classes, I did what I call a lightning round at the start of the class where, you know, people answer some goofy non-class related question in the chat, and then we banter about the answers that people give. That's the kind of thing that might happen automatically in person, or that you'd take for granted that it would happen just kind of chatting before class, but doesn't happen automatically on Zoom. And so I had to think more about how to create opportunities for it. The other way in which I was more structured is it seemed to me, and I don't have any like formal polling on this, but it seemed to several of my colleagues as well that students were having a harder time tracking things like, how is this part of the lesson plan related to this other part of the lesson plan? Or how is what we talked about on Tuesday related to what we talked about last Thursday? You know, so I found myself doing a lot more signposting. And one of the benefits of that I didn't anticipate is, so the way I did that signposting was each class period, I'd have a Google Doc where, you know, with some notes and some discussion questions, and then I would copy and paste that into, after class, I'd copy and paste into a Google Doc that contained all the past versions of that. So you could look back and see what we'd done before and see what's building on what, and I could refer to the past documents. One thing that was great about that is it meant that in addition to students having their own notes, they also could look back at a record of what other classmates contributed. Because if they made a point, I would type it in there under that discussion question. And in person, the board might get erased at the end of class, but there it was. And so if you were thinking about a paper, and you were trying to remember, like, what's this good point that my classmate made that I want to think more about? Well, you could go find it in the Google Doc. And so I definitely want to think about how to keep that going forward. Maybe like having shared note-taking responsibility, or just taking pictures of the board at the end of the class or something like that. That seems like it was a payoff I didn't expect at all, but I benefited from a lot.
Thanks, Cory. Kevin, do an answer from you also, please?
Yeah, I just realized I wasn't muted that whole time. More structured, even more willing than normal to become unraveled as class goes. So example of that, because I wanted to mention this early because it kind of goes with the silver linings. So one of the goals and objectives of our class is to to feel how the body is moving in space rather than the idea of what the image of what you're doing is, right? Because not all dance is that way, but a lot of concert dance, a lot of commercial dance, a lot of studio dance is very two-dimensional. It's like the concern with the shape or how you look in the mirror or how you look in front of somebody. And so that's already the goal, and it's already difficult for students. So for example, when we're doing things, I'm like, okay, so this is your camera, this is my front, and we're doing things that are three-dimensional. When they're not looking at their camera, they can't see me. That's already challenging in class, but there's usually other bodies there. And this was becoming a really big problem. So I was hyper-structured and being like, okay, your right hand is reaching across your body to your left side of the room. You're now, so like, yada, yada, yada. What I found though was I needed to let go of that because they were actually not doing anything differently than they would in class. They were waiting for me to tell them what to do. So the other day, this actually became a 2-week assignment. I said, you have to know not only what you feel, but also who and what your body is in space. So I was like, okay, in your room, what is left corner? What is left corner high? And so we did a whole remapping of our individual spaces at home because we don't have the same space. And what that meant and where you were in tight spaces and what tight spaces meant you had to improvise and be creative with what you do. You had to modify and you had to own that for yourself, right? So what became annoyance was something you had to own about your space. Moreover, though, what was really cool about it was I was like, oh, we have to actually do the work. We got to slow down. So this one phrase was a 3-week assignment because students had to slow down in breakout rooms. They had to work with a friend and they had to be able to identify who and what their body was in space. So they were actually given the task to say, my right foot is reaching to my left side of the room. My tail is going upside down. My left foot is dropping to my left side of the, but what happened was, and the reason I wanted to mention it was because this is something I never really required the students to do, but it was a game changer. Suddenly in a modern level 1 class, never taken all this swirly divey floor class, after we did that, the confidence through the roof. And like half those students signed up for modern 2. And I'm like, oh, it's this thing that I pass through and that they kind of get, but I actually needed, that's the new assignment. That's actually the building blocks of confidence, not whether they can do it, but whether they can own it. So I was super structured and then I realized like, oh, a new door opened and I unraveled it. And that's my answer.
Wonderful. Structure becoming unstructured, creating a new structure for going forward. Let's move on to our next question. We're doing good on time, but there's so many threads we haven't pulled on. Were there any tools, resources, or pedagogy you discovered or used this year that you'll continue to turn to in the future? Michelle, will you start us off?
Sure. I, like Deborah, started using Perusall, and I used it for a specific class, which is my literary theory class. And students always struggle with those materials because, you know, they are dense, they are prohibitive in their style of really diving in. And so I struggled with this class to how to build confidence with students, both in trying to understand, but also to like ask for help if they needed it. And, you know, we would make it through in previous semesters, but using Perusall, which essentially is a tool where you upload a reading to a website, all the students can see it and they can annotate it. So I would, thanks to CTL faculty member Warren Liu, who suggested that I give students some limited page ranges that they would be required to annotate. They had to read the whole thing, but like they would be in groups. So group 1 annotate pages 1 and 2, group 2, and so on, you know, different page ranges. And I think it needs a little bit more tweaking because I need to figure out how to take those annotations and then kind of incorporate it more into the discussion, like what was missing, what they really struggled with. But I think that enabling them to read together, and I said, you know, you have to post something. It's okay to just write like, I don't understand what this is talking about right here. How does this connect to X portion of the text? So I think that is a tool I will definitely continue to use. And I also had begun to do ungrading a couple of semesters ago, thanks to conversations with Jessica. And I continue that as well. So those are my 2 big ones.
Perusall and ungrading. Deborah, do you want to add anything?
Well, that would be my answers, Perusall and ungrading. And, you know, I read a bunch about both before I decided to go down that path. And just FYI, for those of you who have not had a lot of involvement with Perusall, they recommend that you have a class size of about 18 or so per reading assignment. So if you have a larger class, then you could do 2 groups. If you have a smaller class, then you maybe want to have fewer pages or split it up a little differently. So just keep that in mind, that it does work better if you have, you know, a good healthy group to annotate. And also too, the Perusall has some features where you can use the machine grading for comments, right? So the machine actually scores comments based on the content. And I don't know how I feel about that, honestly. I mean, I shared those scores with the students so they could reflect on their own activity in Perusal, but I did not use it at all to grade. You can if you'd like to, but I did not do that. And I found Perusal to be an unexpected delight. And I say that because I actually had them warm up with the Perusal by having them annotate my syllabus. And that was really great because they got a chance to use the tool, comment on each other's comments. I went in and answered questions that they had about this. And so they got comfortable using it. And then slowly throughout the term, they really liked how peers were responding to each other, improves how they could ask questions, how they could flag certain peers. And there are other features of Perusal, like they could write notes to themselves, right, and using Perusal. So there are other features that I don't know that I advertise or use very much, but so and they really liked the interaction. And I think that they felt like they weren't just alone reading the material, but that they could ask questions. They didn't have to feel like, oh, I know this, I can ask questions and see other people's perspectives, because students brought in their own experiences, their own, kind of life experiences as they interpret or respond to the text. And so that really was great. And I had a few Perusal assignments throughout the term that were optional. Quite a few students decided to do that anyway. So I really thought that that was a really great tool for students. I'm happy to go more into detail about ungrading later, but let me stop there.
Great, unexpected delight. That's what this panel is all about. Kathy, do you have something to add here?
Yeah, I think this year has been a good reminder of just how truly universal the principles of universal design really are. And of course, the medium looks different. The medium affects what we do, whether that's Zoom or in the classroom, but just the ideas that I got from the CTL book group a couple of years ago when we read what Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone, things like in Zoom, I found myself thinking, boy, my audio really cuts out during faculty meetings. I wish they had a slide up that had the text so I could see it too. And then thinking I should do that in my class. And if that's true on Zoom, I'm sure there are students in the classroom who miss something, they don't hear it, or their English is not their first language and it helps them to see it written out, right? So thinking about the multiple modalities for sharing the content, thinking about giving students multiple ways to show their knowledge. We did a choose your own adventure project in one of my classes, and it was delightful. I got everything from research proposals to a podcast. As someone mentioned, they'd had something similar to a game of Jeopardy about the content. Thinking about giving flexibility. I've always had life happens policies in my classes, but I think this year I've thought about them differently. I've tried to emphasize them more, make them even more flexible, and I want to carry that forward because life is going to keep happening even when the pandemic is over. And so, yeah, so thinking about universal design is something that I've been really, really appreciating, and especially that the CTL kind of had that vocabulary for us before this hit.
Wonderful. Erin, do you want to add something too?
Yeah. So there are a few sort of very basic things that I just found useful, and I'm not sure how I would integrate them coming forward. Like, will I ask people to have laptops in class? Will everyone have laptops? Is that fair to ask? But things like group work on Google Docs, that's super helpful. I've been wondering, like, can we have Zoom chat without Zoom? Because I really like Zoom, like Zoom chat. Like I like being able to drop in links there. I like being able to put the agenda there. It's much less unwieldy than writing things on the board. And I don't know, maybe that's just lazy, like to get up and like scratch, but it also takes a lot less time. You just have everything ready to go, right in your notes, and you drop it in. And I also like the chat for getting feedback from students in different ways. And I actually feel like I need to develop that. Like I like some of the things that Cory was saying about having those kind of, chats on Zoom, like structured. Another thing about Zoom that I liked was turning off my mic. And it just helped to say, I'm turning off my mic and you all are going to carry the conversation now. And that was really just like, maybe that was more about like, oh, I just need to shut up more. But it was just one of those tools that was very helpful to signal that. And then, turning off my mic, and then they are getting very uncomfortable. But because you're not embodied, you don't feel that discomfort quite so much. So you can just sit there and wait a lot more easily, at least for me. I really liked Slack. And I liked labor. Well, I was using, I don't know how you all are defining ungrading, but I was using a version of that, which I had read about, called labor-based grading. And I actually don't know what I want to do, some version of that going forward, but I don't know if it'll be labor-based, because I don't know if that's actually better in terms of equity, because labor is still I don't know, having time to do labor is still the issue. But so that's something maybe we could talk about after. But those are the things that I definitely, they're all like just tools that just were little tweaks that were super helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you. Our next question is about student interaction. How did you create positive student interactions this year, either between you and your students or between student to student? What strategies for student interaction do you think will benefit students as we go back to an in-person context? David, will you start us off here? Sure, thanks. I already mentioned a little bit about some stable breakout rooms, which were good. But one thing that I did, and Kathy did this as well in a course we co-taught for first-year chemistry students, is having some, we didn't do Google Docs because in chemistry it's often very visual and the Docs is a little limited. We did Google Slides. And the nice thing there is you could, instead of just seeing one sort of scroll that does go down, you can see lots of different slides. You can see different groups simultaneously, kind of how they're doing. You can kind of track their progress. You can give them little things to show how far they're getting. So you can see their mastery or completion of different things live, which was nice. And you can peek in and put little notes in. You can like, haha, oops, check this one, that, think about this again or whatever. You can kind of stealth without like bombing into their breakout room, which feels very disruptive. You can kind of more subtly interact in that way. So there's like different levels of interacting with students in that way, which was nice. A rather different thing. So usually when we're in person and I could have students to my home, I love to do that to kind of show hospitality. I'm not just a professor on campus, I'm a person in a home and I have a family. And so I love to do that. I couldn't do that, obviously, for many reasons. But I was like, all right, I want to do something kind of like that, and have the informal conversations that we have in those situations when we talk about whatever. And it's not about class at all when we have them over typically. And so we had like little kind of Zoom icebreaker parties. And so I had like 7 or 8 students at a time. So I broke up the class into groups and we would sit in my living room. So not in my office at home here, but in the living room, with my kids, our dog, my wife, kind of hanging around. And just, we did like 2 truths and a lie. We did some other little quick, like, what would be a realistic career in the future, looking 10, 20 years down the road, or a fantastical one? Like if money weren't an issue, what would you love to do? Some hobby, like stuff like that, where we could just talk about other things. And then like, what country would you want to visit? So stuff like that was a lot of fun. And I think that broke down some barriers. I didn't get to give them food, but it broke down some barriers in terms of later interactions during the semester. So doing that early on helps me get to know them better. And I was able to do that, not in a perfect sense, but in a way that still, had some of the same outcome, I believe. Thank you, David. Erin, will you also answer this question?
Yeah, I think this is maybe where I had the most success. And my offerings are fairly, these are small things, but I would do check-ins every class. So every class I just asked them, I would do some version of like, what is your weather check, or your personal weather check, or, what color do you feel like today? Or, what movie have you watched recently that you enjoyed? Or, the best one was, what is one interest that you have that other people might not know about? And that was super phenomenal, because then we got to, hear about what all the great things that people do. But, or what is your superpower? And I think students really like that. And how we would do it is they would just ping pong to each other. So then they also had to get to know each other's names and look out for who was speaking and not speaking. And sometimes I would have them do a check-in in small groups. So I would just put them in small groups at the beginning of class, like say, okay, have 3-4 minutes just to hang out and chat. And then when they come back, I would ask them to put a 1-word check-in in that chat, so that I could also get a kind of temperature for how they're doing. So I feel like that was really good for community building in the class, and they seem to like it. The other thing that I did, and I think there might be mixed responses to this among students, but I did hear from some that they really liked it, is that I would do a centering exercise every class. So, and prior to Zoom life, this would probably be very cringy for me, but I really felt like just doing a couple of rounds of breathing. Like I'd say, okay, feet flat on the floor, sit up straight, let's do a couple of rounds of breathing. And over the semester, I would teach them different breathing strategies. And then just basically, to really like 3 breaths each time. So not like extended or anything. And I feel like that was just that was helpful for me because it helped calm me in those times where I was just like, oh my God, how am I gonna, get through today? Yeah. And then one other thing, I think I do this always in my community participation classes, but I think I think the group presentations have been so strong. Online, it makes it a little, I don't know, it's just a little easier, or maybe they were more creative, or I don't know, but their group presentations were so strong that I think I would do that in all my classes going forward. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Erin. Deborah, do you have an answer to this question?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that my students liked this year with regard to the question about student interactions was Zoom bubble groups. I gave them a document where I said that they needed, that I was going to, I was going to assign them groups, and that they, it was going to be for a particular week, or I assigned them groups, they had to choose the week in the syllabus, and then it was 20 minutes that they had to go around and discuss the readings. And it didn't have to be all the readings. It could be 2 or more, however they wanted, but they could just do it. And, just in the process of them organizing when they were going to meet, when they were going to record, who's going to record, what they thought of the readings, they built, kind of a small community with at least 3 other people in class who they could talk to. And so a lot of students really felt like that, and of course I did Zoom breakout groups every week, so they could also rotate and have a smaller group of people to talk to before we had a larger class discussion. The other thing I also did for the Zoom breakout groups is I had questions that I wanted them to address. But at the beginning, I said, take 5 minutes and check in with each other. And so I think that they also like that they could spend 5 minutes checking in and then talk about the questions. And I did it where it was randomized. So they were in different groups each week. But I think that between those 2 things, Zoom groups and that, I think that they really started to build community with each other and liked it a lot.
Wonderful. Barbara, will you also share?
Sure. So a lot of what I was going to say has already been said. So I will say I asked the students, well, so a couple of things we did. So first, in my classes, we made Spotify playlists of songs to share, and people got to listen to them and share about like why they chose those songs. The other thing I did was I asked them if they wouldn't mind to share their addresses, and I sent them presents, like a little card in a tea bag or something like that. One of my students said she wished that we could send each other cards, but I wasn't sure how. I felt like maybe there's confidentiality. I wasn't sure, so I didn't go down that route, but that might be something I'll try in the future. But just overall, I kept asking. I started from the very beginning and would reiterate this semester, but like this idea that our classroom is an organization, because I teach organizational studies, and it's a community. So what do we want to give and receive? So whenever we would do something like a peer review activity or talking about a text or whatever, I would just do, in addition to check-ins, we'd go around in a circle and I'd ask, what's something you would like to give to this conversation and what's something you would like to receive? And everyone would share those things. And a lot of the things I shared were things that I hadn't even thought of. And then generally I would ask them questions like, what do you want to give and receive to make our community a reality? So we put that in our syllabus, like each person wrote, what do they want to give and receive, and what were their values? And then we would read them periodically to like remind us, how are we doing on this, on the giving and receiving? I also asked them when we would have different projects, I would say, like, when you're in your group, and I used Box as our collaborative thing. So everything is on there, everything everybody used, you can do to write it together just like you can Google Docs. But I would ask them, like, what do you want out of this? What are the values that underlie like how you're going to participate in this, and what are some accountability structures? And the teams would write them themselves. And then so they'd have a language, and they wouldn't feel shy to be like, I need more communication. I need more structure. I need people to be on time, and it didn't come from me, it came from the students. And then the other thing I'll say is, Yeah, I use superpowers too. So when we would get them into, I'd get the students into breakout rooms and they would, write up their answers. I'd have them all on one document and I would just make these tables. Like the first column is like who is in the team, what are your answers to the questions? So everyone could actually see each other writing simultaneously in different breakout rooms. But in the first column, it'd be like, what are your names? What is your superpower? And what is your team's name? And so they would be like, they'd write little things and they'd come up with silly names. And I know it's really silly, but it would make them feel like, oh, we're already a team, And I kept calling them teams. I'd be like, all right, research team number 1. I've never done that before. I don't know. Like I said, I can't really see. I don't really know what's happening. So I'm just like, I'll just be as silly and silly as possible. And they seemed to really like it and they really bonded. Yeah. So I was really pleased with that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Barbara. This is our last question, and it's going to be sort of a lightning round for our panelists, so try to keep it as brief as possible. Will you please share one thing you did, used, or felt during remote teaching that you want to bring with you into the after times? We'll start with Cory.
I guess both of the things I said in previous answers could say for that, but one other one is I was very nervous about asynchronous activities, and they often went much better than I expected them to. And so one thing I want to bring with me is just like losing the fear of asynchronous stuff.
Less fear, more asynchrony. David, your answer?
Sure, I'd say quickly it'd be using Gradescope to grade certain things, exams and homework. I've gotten a lot better at that, and I see some value in equity across grading with that as well, instead of being more arbitrary, which it kind of feels like sometimes. And empathy for students, which has been said before, but I'm going to say that again because it's been a big deal.
Gradescope and empathy. Deborah?
I really very much like Discord. It's a Slack alternative, and I definitely plan to use that again in the fall. It worked great. Students liked it. I'm all for Discord.
Awesome. Discord. Erin?
Yeah, so I definitely will continue the check-ins. I might continue the breathing, and I would like to hold on to that feeling of not worrying about all of the issues that come with embodiment, just for me and also for my students, and that sort of those sense of boundaries that you have in Zoom. And I think, and sorry, this is getting a little long, but I think I've been able to recognize other people's emotions a little bit better than just feeling them all the time. And then they impact me, but actually now having a little bit of distance, I can be like, oh, that's somebody else's emotion, So.
Awesome. Yeah, keeping a little bit of the space so you can react. Kathy?
Yeah, I think as others have said, continuing to be mindful of students as people and also my colleagues and the faculty and staff. And I'll leave it at that.
Empathy. Barbara? Barbara?
Sorry. I used these words a lot and I'm going to use them more. I used the word gratitude, joy. I said love a lot. What do you love? And experiment, let's just try it. Adventure, let's have an adventure and see what happens.
Beautiful, lovely. Adventure. Kevin?
Mine would be kind of piggyback on what Erin said. I think that maybe it's just part of being a facilitator and imposter syndrome, but it's like I always want to do the right thing. And there's something about Zoom that I hope this isn't antithetical to what I said earlier, because I want to keep taking cues and listen. At the same time, there was like a little bit of permission of like, this is all I got, right? Like this is what I can do within the. And as I go back in person, I want to be as listening, but still also trust like I'm there to facilitate something, and it's going to really work for a bunch of students that day, and it's not going to work. And you can't also anticipate always what someone needs, right? Someone might be going through a hard time and be like, I need to do the work today. I can't sit in my feelings, where someone else might need the space for that. And so I want to take the cues, but at the same time, always be transparent. Like, this is what we're doing today. If this isn't going to work for you, please take agency and get what you need, right? And it's something I practice, but it's something I'm going to hold on to more. So going off what Erin said, it's like the space, but also the boundaries to recognize like, this is what we're doing and I'm going to do it the best I can. And that is the limitation of that, whether I'm in person or on camera.
Wonderful. Michelle, will you finish us off?
Yes, I will. I'm going to try to continue to let go of my hangups about rigor and how I've understood rigor as being about assigning a shit ton of reading, because I slashed my syllabus to the bone and we had better conversations. We were slower and more deliberative. And I realized that the way that I was designing my syllabus specifically around reading was about myself, not actually about creating an environment conducive to learning.
Wonderful. This has been such a rich and fruitful conversation. I can't thank you guys enough for participating. We have a few more minutes, 10 more minutes or so till we're scheduled to end. So I'm going to open the floor to participants to answer questions. I'll also plug the CTL if something came up today. So you want to learn more about perusal or the pedagogy behind ungrading or something like that. That's something the CTL can help you with. Feel free to email us anytime. So if anyone has any questions, you can use the raise hand question feature in Zoom, and I'll call on you to direct a question to the panel. I don't see any hands. All right. Oh, Erin, go for it.
Can we make comments?
Yeah, I'd love that.
Because I love the idea that people were talking about in various capacities of small group, like almost like little learning groups within classes. And I think I will integrate that because I think it's a really smart, and like the building of community in class seems important, right? So.
Absolutely. Michelle,
I have
go
a
for it.
question
Yeah.
for the group. Is going to try to continue with asynchronous days? Sorry, I'm seeing that my internet is unstable, but I can put it in the chat if it continues to be wonky. But I was just wondering if anyone is going to continue to, even when we're in person, maybe have a day where we won't be in class. Because I've thought about it, but it seems scary, which probably means I'm on the right.
Mary, do you want to answer that?
I was just going to say, I'm going to do it. I think it's been really helpful for my students to have some space and to do some of that. For my class, for general chemistry, there's some problem solving, and yes, it's great for them to be together to do that, but it is also sometimes exhausting. So I'm going to give them a day where I have asynchronous. We will continue, sorry, my whole chem group is going to leave the lectures from last year so that our in-class time will be more collaborative than it used to be. But I'm still going to have, instead of 3 days a week, I'm going to be with them 2 days a week and 1 day a week. I'll be available if they want to drop in, and I'll have it in a separate Zoom room, which is an like open hours room, so that they don't even feel like they have to, like it's not a class period. But I want them to have a little more time, like sleep in, or don't do this assignment because it's just practice. And if you don't need it, don't do it. Or if you're overwhelmed, don't come. So yeah, I'm going to do it. I think we're going to face some real issues in the fall, getting back to normal.
Yeah.
And it's going to be exhausting to be around people, and we're going to be freaked out being around people. So I still want to give that room. Even if I don't keep it forever, I'm definitely keeping it for the fall, and then maybe see what happens.
I agree with Mary. I teach 3-hour courses, and now it's 2 hours synchronous and then 1 hour asynchronous, which I count as perusal. And that seems to work really well. The students really like it. And I teach late at night. So, you know, they're also really happy about that. And I think, I'm going to continue that in the fall as well.
Warren, I see you raised your hand.
Oh, yes, I did. Sorry, I can't see myself because I turned my self view off, so I forgot. Yeah, I wanted to also ask if others had tried, kind of this is linked to Michelle's question. One thing I did last semester was I split my class into 2. And so, although I was there synchronously every Tuesday, Thursday, only half of them came each day. So I had 8 on Tuesday, 8 on Thursday. And then we would have, I think every 4th class or 5th class, we would just have a full asynchronous session. And I thought that worked remarkably well, actually. It was like really nice to actually have this really, and I think partly was because with 8 people on Zoom, it's a little bit easier to actually see everybody and to sort of see what's going on. I was wondering if any others had tried that kind of splitting, and if others had imagined actually trying to do that in person, which is actually, to be totally honest, I haven't been thinking at all about what I'm going to be doing. I'm not thinking about it right now either. But now that you asked the question, I'm wondering if others have thought about like, oh, could that work actually as an in-person structure? So that was both a comment and a question.
I will just add, we're going to have a lot of ability to be flexible now that lots of things have changed. We can kind of flip the script as we go back. Anything else to add, anyone?
Well,
Panelists, is there anything you want? Oh, go ahead, Deborah, sorry.
No, sure. I just wanted to ask Warren real quick. So when you split your class into like 8, sometimes having that few people, there might not be a lot of discussion. So I was wondering how you felt like you managed that.
Yeah, the reason that I did that was because I wanted to slow the reading down. And so it actually helped me because, so rather than spending sort of the same amount of time and trying to cram in readings in a 3-week period or a 2-week period, I just had them read less and then take more time. And so what would normally take a 1-week total session of a book, it ended up taking a week and a half or 2 weeks sometimes. And then in conjunction with that, I just made sure that I was actually so I use Perusall too for that class. And I made sure that I was actually responding, and I participated in their conversations on Perusall as they were doing them, and I would respond, and that helped me sort of figure out who was really engaged, but also then it helped me identify things I could ask them each individually once we met in person. And that was another way to both build community, but also to kind of like extend that offline conversation into the in-person, or not in-person, the online space. So it actually ended up being really helpful for me because I was like, oh, they're paying attention and they're doing these, they have really interesting comments, but also like they appreciate these little like, I wasn't like writing paragraphs on Perusall. I was just like, this is a really cool point, bring this up in class. And then they did. And so it's like, oh, this is great. So that's, I think it helped with getting more participation in some ways.
Wonderful. Panelists, is there anything you wanted to share that you didn't get a chance to? I moved us through this pretty quickly. So if there's anything you want to expand on, now's a great time.
Can I say while y'all are thinking that you all are just a gift to us and we're so grateful. I maybe teared up 4 times. That's cool. Because I'm just so grateful for all you do for your students and all you do to make sure that like teaching and learning is at the forefront of everything we are at the Claremont Colleges. And it's just it really does my heart good. Mary had to leave, but I also wanted to mention to you all that Mary is about done with her term at the Claremont Colleges, Mary Hunter Skiers. So if you have a chance to reach out to her and thank her, that would be much appreciated because we have certainly benefited from her time here. Thank you all. Yeah, we appreciate you.
Thank you all. I'll set you free for the rest of your evenings. And we're always here for you if you want to connect in another way as we move into the end of the semester and looking forward.
Thanks, everyone. It was super inspirational. And yeah, I really enjoyed hearing and learning from all of you. That was great. Yeah, it was terrific.
Yeah, I'm uplifted.